So as you can see, last week I was wrestling with this idea, whether it is good to be born blind or going blind. You know, and we have people right here in our congregation, you know, people who had good sight, was able to see everything, and now gradually losing, you know. And so, which is better, you know. But this is what I can say. Either way, there are a lot of assumptions, isn't it? For people who are born blind during the biblical days, you know, they had limited role. They were relegated to a homestay. You know, you just stay here, you know, couldn't do much. They were expected to do some, you know, household domestic chores. And then they also had a high level of, what do you call it? Senses and attuned to some reality, because they need to know exactly where they're going back and forth. It is all memorized, right? You know, because you have learned to where your bed is and where the kitchen is, and you know, and so you were able to navigate. You have developed a pattern for to function well. Now, on the other hand, for those who have lost their sight, they have different kinds of assumptions. For them, they have this knowledge and understanding about their previous life. They know when you say an apple, they exactly know what apple looks like. If you tell them something about a BMW, they know exactly what BMW, I mean, there are all kinds of versions, but, you know, at least they know, you know, they know what BMW is. So they have a memory bank which is filled with informations, images, and they can think in color because of their previous experience. Right? And therefore sometimes for those who had the sight and now losing, sometimes they are determined to operate their life with the previous gained understanding, right? And sometimes they try to overexert. I used to do this. I can do this, right? And but the reality is that they cannot. So the old ways of understanding life has to be tested by what one sees, and interpretation have to be evaluated as new experiences are accumulated, right? We need constant evaluation, which basically means that the new ways of learning will have to deconstruct your old ways, right? The old ways of doing, and then you have to reconstruct something new that you are beginning to gain and understand about life. Does that make sense? Deconstruction and reconstruction. Developing new patterns and new assumptions. It's a learning curve. So the question for us this morning is, what kinds of assumptions do you have about yourself, about God, about your church, about your church leadership? Yeah. You know, what kind of assumptions you have? Sometimes assumptions could be, you know, positive. Sometimes they could be very negative because when you have so much assumptions, you tend to box everything and label it well, like a beautiful pantry where every Tupperware is properly labeled. There is no margin of error. Does that make sense? You know? Our story says, the text that was just read for us this morning, says that there was a son in the community, according to John. A son of a community who was born blind. But unfortunately, everyone around him, whether it was religious teachers, community leaders, his own parents, everybody boxed him as a blind man who stood on the road or by the sidewalk or by the corner and begged. Everybody basically labeled this person as one who stood at the corner of the road with a plate or a cup, jingling, reminding you to give him or her the money. Okay? So now let's look at. I want you to see the text not before you, but try to remember the text that was read for us. In verse 1, we read that Jesus encountered a blind man from his birth. But the disciples, this is the critical and important part, his disciples were trying to figure out why and how this man was born blind. They are already trying to analyze this person who is blind. They are even trying to theologize the effects of sin in the descendants. Who sinned? His parents or him? Why is he born blind? Rather than asking the question, can God do anything for this person who is born blind? Rather, the disciples, they are focused on the sins of his parents or even him who is born blind. Verse 3, Jesus is not interested. As you can see, Jesus is really not interested in pointing his fingers at any one of them. I think church would like to pinpoint, say whose wrong it is, whose sin it is, right? I think church is very good at that. Religious people are very good at that. But Jesus is staying away from judgment. And Jesus said it's almost like it's none of your business. Right? It's none of your business. He abstains from pointing fingers. Instead, verse 6, Jesus spat on the ground and made into mud and spread it over the eyes of the blind man and told him to go to verse 7, Siloam, to wash at the pool. What we see in this text is faith in God is acting on God's word, action, right? It's not just something that you say, something that you speak, but it is something that you do. And And so he goes out to the pool. He returned seeing. He returned seeing. Verse 7b. The miracle itself becomes the problem. Instead of the community celebrating for the one who have gained sight, like the woman who lost money, and when she found the money, community came together and celebrated because one that was lost was found. But in this case, when the blind man gained sight, it became an issue for Jesus. They were trying to box him as well, in a nice way, with a nice ribbon on it, right? Now, let's look some more. Let's look at, so in other words, the community, his own community, had all kinds of assumptions against their own son. Right? Are you with me? Look at verse 8. Look at verse 8. His neighbors just could not believe. They were even debating among themselves. Is this the guy who used to stand in the corner and beg? And others would say, can't be. He's kind of look-alike guy. In the movie MASH, they talk about, oh, what was Asian? They all look alike. Now, so here we see his own neighbors talking about, must be a look-alike guy. Can't be that person whom we know is blind. He can't be seen now. You with me this? Look at verse 16. They brought now seeing or formerly blind to the Pharisee. Now, for the Pharisees, they are more concerned about the Sabbath rather than the one who was healed and stands before them. And their question is, if he is of God, sent of God, how can he ruin the Sabbath and heal somebody on Sabbath? He's more concerned about his religious celebrations, or I don't know what else I can put there, rather than celebrating with their son and maybe even praying for him because now he can see. They were questioning him and his parents were saying. In verse 18, the community did not believe. And so they come to his parents and they're asking, they're interrogating. It's almost like an inquisition, asking, tell us what the heck happened. Isn't he the son that was born blind? They are really making things rough and tough for his parents. But I kind of like their answer to the religious leaders. Verse 23, hey, he's old enough, he's mature enough. Why don't you just ask him? rather than trying to, dig something wrong from us, why don't we just go straight to the person who was blind and now can see, asking why or how you don't have it?